He au kei uta e taia te karo, he au ki te moana e kore e taia. I runga i ngā au o whakamiha, tēnei ka ofa atu kia koutou katoa. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai, Pāho and Irirangi Te Motu, New Zealand on air. Later in the show, we speak to Te Pāti Māori MP Tākuta Ferris about the Dunedin hospital protest and how the coalition government's policies aimed at Māori will impact his electorate. Engari, mātua rā ka mātai atu ki tai, ki uta, ki te piri hou, mō te takutai moana. A controversial bill that makes it more difficult for iwi to be granted customary marine title has passed its first reading in Parliament. Amendments to the Marine and Coastal Areas Act are expected to be passed into legislation before the end of this year. Maka was National and Te Pāti Māori's alternative to the Clark government's much-reviled foreshore and seabed legislation and was amended in 2023 in response to a Court of Appeal decision. But Treaty Negotiations Minister Paul Goldsmith's amendment bill will overturn that decision and raise the threshold for customary title. Treaty lawyer Annette Sykes has been an outspoken opponent of both the Foreshore and Seabed legislation and the Marine and Coastal Areas Act, and she joins me now. Tēnā koe te tuakana.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou e whakarongo mai nei tēnei kaupapa hurunu mo te awa. Kei te mihi atu kia koe hoki te tuahinga I tō tūranga hau, hei whaipakara mo tō tātou nei Māori.
Tēnā koe. Annie, in your mind, what does exclusive use and occupation from 1840 look like?
It's a shared obligation to care for a particular place in accordance with your values. Because of the value of manaakitanga, it's actually inclusive of those relationships that are located in that place. So it's not unusual for many hapu, for example, who live near harbours or estuarine waters, to share that space to enable them to sustain their way of life. Get kai, get paringo, get the weaving crafts to enable their normal practices, get sand for hangis, the whole bit. For me, exclusive use means to operate that within the exclusive paradigm of manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, kaitiakitanga, and with the primary obligation being to sustain that environment for future generations.
And how has the test to prove that changed?
Well, under the current proposal before Parliament, which was introduced under haste and without consultation with Māori, it's now suggesting that if a fisher person has come into that space, that somehow interrupts the nature of the relationship, which has subsisted for thousands of years in some places, in a way that makes those relationships either ahi mātātau, frozen, or ahi wito, extinguished. And that test, in my view, is quite inconsistent with both tikanga Māori, but more fundamentally with the common law arrangements which guided both the Clark government and the national government with the Māori Party to make the amendments to the Maka Act, which is now the subject of repeal by this coalition.
What was the Supreme Court decision that led to these amendments, and what do those amendments mean?
It wasn't the Supreme Court, it was a Court of Appeal decision that was heard last year. And there was a majority decision, so it was a 2-1 decision. And what the Court of Appeal confirmed was the definition that I gave for shared exclusivity, exclusive use and occupation in accordance with tikanga Māori would be given paramount in the way that relationships would be recognised in what we call a customary marine title. What this proposal is trying to do is to create a hegemony, put in place a set of values that will undermine those values of sharing, caring, looking after, with one which would give some priority for those that are in the seafood industry and others who are more about protecting their access to scarce resources rather than sharing those scarce resources for the communities that are sustained by them. And they are changing the test to enable what some people predict, there would be no customary titles able to be issued in light of the standard that they have increased to. What they've also done, and this is, I think, the most unconstitutional part of the proposal, is that under common law, if you're going to take away someone's rights, if you're going to extinguish those rights, you have to do it with their full, free and informed consent. And where you do it, you have to actually pay them compensation. In this piece of legislation, they're also taking out the obligation to pay compensation where they are taking people's rights away. And I think that's the particular matter that I think is causing the major outrage amongst our people. We've gone back to a position before the Foreshore and Seabed Act, in my view. We've gone back to a retrograde position. Notwithstanding now, we've had the Supreme Court in Atiapa confirm that Māori had pre-existing rights. Whakatohea have gone through the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and now poised to go to the Supreme Court to prove how those rights are given effect to. We now have a small sector of the seafood industry lobby influencing Mr. Goldsmith to make significant changes, which really turn the head of common law propositions that have existed for centuries.
You were opposed to the National Māori Party's Marine and Coastal Areas Act back in 2011. Are those concerns being realised now?
Yeah, my concern when the MACA Act came in is the compensation element that I talk about here. And the other thing is that in Māori conceptual thinking, or tikanga Māori, our law, the rights that were being proposed to be recognised in were just a part of the actual rights that Māori have in there. For example, the court can't recognise any spiritual relationships that may subsist there in their own right as part of the recognition orders that can be given under the current legislation. So even the MACA Act that was a compromise from the common law position didn't go as far as I believe tikanga Māori requires. However, in the spirit of compromise, we allowed the test to be tested in the courts. We have come with good faith to have that test up, by great minds. Can I say, one of the things that really concerns me by the current coalition is the way that they really are pushing the edges of the obligation to respect the judiciary. There are some really great minds in the judiciary, and I think they should be given the respect that they deserve, not the mean-spirited comments, for example, from Minister Jones to one of our High Court judges. That is really not decorum. That's not proper separation of powers. And for those in the Kāwanatanga, like the New Zealand First Party, that keep saying we should play by their rules, well, they should also play by the rule of law and show cognizant respect to the separation of powers that our constitutional system relies on to give it a constitutional justice that we can all have faith in. If they continue undermining these things, then of course we see lack of cohesion and disruption, and we can actually see, I think, fraying of the constitutional values that Kāwanatanga operates under.
How concerned are you about the undermining of the judiciary system?
I'm very concerned in this way that the judiciary hasn't even allowed to test whether the Court of Appeal is right. You've got an appeal process that's set out by the doctrine of stare decisis in our judicial system, and that enables you to appeal a case if you think it's wrong. Can I say the Crown didn't appeal the High Court decision to the Court of Appeal? They were an interested party in the Court of Appeal. It's only since this coalition government's come in that they have now taken an active role as a respondent in the Supreme Court. Now, what would be proper decorum would be to wait for the Supreme Court judgment to argue whatever the matters of concern are that are being proposed by the coalition agreement, and allow the court's process to actually take its course and give guidance to this country on one of the most fundamental issues that I think has been around or has puzzled our nation state since 1860. But they haven't waited. They've done a preemptive strike. They've come in and criticised the Court of Appeal, for goodness sake, saying the majority haven't got their original intent right. that public statement really is worrying because it's made by Minister Goldsmith, who wasn't even in government the last time when those original intent aspects were determined in the court. And, it's disrespectful. It's not behaviour that you would expect from the National Party. And I want to be really clear, it's at the hands of Mr. Goldsmith that this piece of legislation is being passed. Remembering, of course, that it arises from the coalition agreement that National have with New Zealand First. It's not the ACT Party that has prompted this. It's the coalition agreement between New Zealand First and the National Party. All very disappointing. As someone who propounds tino rangatiratanga and Māori law, it would be like inviting someone into your marae, having them as a manuhiri on your paipai, and not allowing them to have their say. Having the silence of their position determined as being wrong by a tyranny of power on the paipai, which would be unjust, would be unconstitutional, would not be tika, would not be correct, would likely raise the ire of the whole marae. And that's what's being proposed, that's what's being forced into legislation, that's what's happening without proper consultation with every party. And while we have 300 applications or more before the court or direct negotiating, waiting for constitutional justice to be given to them, as was promised by the MACA Act, as was promised after the Ngāti Apa decision, as was promised by Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
This current coalition's bill proposed by Minister Goldsmith, can any hapu or iwi pass the test?
I think Ngāti Ira, who I export in concert with the hapu of Te Pakatohea, the hapu of Ngāti Awa, who have lived consistently between Marae Tōtara and Parakiha, which is the customary marine title boundaries that we are seeking, can satisfy it. Why? They had all their land stolen. They had their land taken by Raupatu when they were innocent parties as a result of the unfortunate killing of Reverend Volkner. After their land was stolen, they became dependent on the sea, but they also coexisted with the Pākehā communities that arrived post-1865, who they forged relationships with, who they lived side by side, who all became dependent on the Ohope and Ohiwa harbours for their life, their ways of life, their mutual survival. They are the one community, I think, that can easily make this matter work. They have done it, there hasn't been a murmuring in the Opotiki community since they've won. In fact, they've developed a marina, and in fact, they've now looked at developing conservation ethics along that customary marine title, because everybody is concerned about the ecological future of the taonga that subsist in there. Why aren't they being allowed to have this justice is the question that we should be asking Minister Goldsmith and the coalition parties.
Does this proposed bill affect everyone, like marinas and those with riparian rights, or is it just iwi and hapu?
Well, there's a hegemony at place that's giving superior rights to those that have private titles than those that, under Māori law, we don't have title, we have relationships. We whakapapa to Papatuanuku and to Papa Moana. Our relationships subsist by the fact of that spiritual union, mana tuku iho, the connection, the iho to Papatuanuku. That is as strong as any certificate of title that you can have issued by the court. What really, really worries me in the current regime is that the hegemony of Pākehā law is being given superiority. So there is a linguistic, a legal imperialism that's being imposed by people from the New Zealand First Party. It's social engineering of the worst kind to actually subsume and deny Māori rights, to diminish Māori rights, and also to offer Māori almost a second-class status, something that's undeserving of a 21st century nation that should be leading the world, both on race relations, but the values of coexistence with multiplicity of customs and relationships being recognised. It's really a step backwards into the quagmire of colonialism that the New Zealand wars cemented and fermented divisive relationships. And if that's what they want to achieve, then they're going the right way about doing it by imposing these kinds of matters without participated of Māori, trampling on their mana, and even trampling on the institutions of justice that have created a sense of social cohesion for our nation for many, many centuries.
Kia ora, ko te koro wai o manaaki ki rungi i a koe te tuakana. Thank you for your time.
Kia ora.
Ko Annette Sykes, tērā. This month marks 1 year since the general election saw 4 new Pāti Māori MPs elected to Parliament. Among them, Te Tonga MP Tākuta Ferris, who made headlines recently after a controversial speech saw him referred to the Privileges Committee. As the MP for Te Tonga, Tākuta represents a number of iwi who'll be impacted by the amendments to the Marine and Coastal Areas Act, including Ngāti Apa, whose legal action sparked the original foreshore and seabed legislation. Hei matapaki I tēnei take ka hono mai a Tākuta, tēnā koe e hoa?
Tēnā koe, Mihingarangi, ka nui te mihi, kia koe o tiraki o tāua whanaunga, me te tūmata nui e mātaki mai ana e whakarongo mai ana ki enei kōrero o tāua.
Tēnā koe. Ko rua te koutou te roa I te hikoi mō te takutai. Hea ho maumaharatanga o Tauara?
Nui aku maumaharatanga o Tauara. Ko tētahi, I rā wāhi ahau, taua wā. I hoki mai ahau I te rā tonu o te hikoi. Nō reira, ka tauatu au ki te taunga wakarere rangi ka haere tōtika atu au ki te ara o Lambton, tētai ara I te mea te hikoi aku whanaunga o Ngāti Kere. Te wāhi tipu ai mātau I roto o Ngāti Kaunguru. He iwi noho takutai moana mātau. Nō reira, taku mahara tuatai ka tūmeke ahau I te tini, I te mano o te tangata. I tai atu ki tau e hikoi. Ka miharo anō hoki au ki ngā Pākehā I puta mai I o rātou tari. Ki te mātakitaki I te hikoi. Ia mātou e hikoi ana. Ngari ko taku tino maumaharatanga ko te hikoi haere a o mātou kuia me te mau I tō mātou haki. A ngārangi whakaupoko. Me te kupenga te huki o rongo maraeroa. Kei te mau pū taua whakāhua, taua pōhewa I roto I aku mahara. Hei aki I ahau. Nō reira, whakamiharo, rua tekau tau ki muri. Tōna rua tekau mā pē aku tau, toru whā aku tau, tērā wā. Tairawa mai ki tēnei wā kei te wharepare mata hau. Eka. Kei te pēnei tonu tātou, kei te pērā tonu te kāwanatanga.
Tēnā koe mō era whakamārama. You've called for a reverse approach to the issue of takutai moana, demanding the Crown proves its rights to the foreshore rather than requiring it of iwi Māori. How realistic is that?
It's as realistic as we would believe it would be, Mihingarangi. That's the thing with politics and law and courts and all of that. It's all a trick. If our people actually behaved like the rangatiratanga is ours, court proceedings and dealing with parliament and all of that stuff would be very different. It would be a different reality. In law, there's a precedent that says possession is 9/10 of the law. And the government, the Pākehās, right? The Pākehā, our manuhiri in our own country, they have held the 9/10 of the law for a long time. So whatever they put up is the gospel, is the word, except for when they want to change it. They can change it, poof, just like that. So it's obviously not that gospel, is it? So our people need to begin to speak more determined and more direct to the reality of our mana. And so what I said in the house the other day was, in 2004, the Māori mana, I said this to Māori, I said in 2004, the mana of the iwi Māori was confiscated by the Crown. But what I say to this house today is that our mana can never be confiscated. It's still there right now. And that's the truth. So that's a belief, right? That's a belief. I was going to say problem.
Yeah.
No, it's not a problem. That's a belief thing we've got to grow.
Earlier in your kōrero, you talked about your iwi being one of the iwi takutai moana. Your electorate has the largest coastline in the country. How would this amendment impact the iwi and your rohe?
Oh, hugely, because it dismisses iwi and hapu ultimate right, the ultimate right to continue to do the things that their tipuna did. That's really what this boils down to. When you're talking self-determination, we're talking about the right to continue to do the things that our tipuna did. And in things like native title and Aboriginal title and all that, we are allowed to continue to do the things that our tipuna did anywhere where our tipuna went. Okay? That's just a fact of law. If you're an iwi and you're landlocked out of your coast, you can walk straight across that coast. Doesn't matter who owns it. Some farmer will own it. We've been through all of this up the coast in Pōrangahau. We've been through all of this stuff all before, since my grandfather's time, all the way down to we're still doing it now. And here we are doing it on a national level. And he kamara, we're dealing with the same things that happened 20 years ago. And people are saying, oh, how are we going to do this? Well, if we don't stand up and do it stronger, in 20 years' time, there'll be another crowd in charge and they'll be doing the same things and be our kids there sorting it out. So I'm not of the view that we let that continue.
Yeah, so what is the best approach? What are the discussions you're having with your iwi about the way forward?
Well, that's a big plan you're asking for there, Mihi. And that's all right, because that's the degree of conversation we need to start raising up. And so at the...
Well, I guess what I'm asking is that, 20 years ago, iwi didn't have the same financial positions as they do now. Iwi are in a very powerful position. What is the difference in the approach to this amendment? Yeah.
So the current resource is being deployed by iwi. So there are, I think, 38 high court cases lodged against the Crown this year. 38 iwi have organised themselves to head into the High Court with the Crown or with the government. And that's sort of the degree of the playing field now. So we have to do that. We have to do that, and we have to go. We have to continue to protest, but protesting the government is a futile exercise with the crowd that's in there now. So we need to advance the protest action to be higher. So at the feet of the Governor-General is the next one. And continuing to grow our belief, understanding, and connection to our wahi in our rohe, to our reo that connects us to all of the things in that wahi, to the tikanga whakahaere that connect us to how to engage with them, use them, all of that, all of those things need to be ramped up. And so for me, to iwi leadership, and I'm part of iwi leadership when I say that, you got to stand up and you got to say this stuff, blunt force straight down the barrel when they're in the room, in the media, on the marae, everywhere.
35,000 people from Dunedin stood up at the weekend against the government's decision to not fund a new hospital. What kind of impact will not having a new hospital mean for that rohe?
Yeah, well, we've seen it all around the country now. People are dying in waiting rooms. That's the impact that not funding things in the health sector has. Obviously, not having a new hospital means you're stuck with the same old thing you've been dealing with for the last 20 years. And it's been slowly degrading itself to a point where it's barely useful. So not having a hospital is obviously detrimental to a very high degree. And the fact that you've got such an intensified set of symptoms coming, on full display now, like people dying in waiting rooms. I mean, that's just completely ridiculous. 2 people have died in waiting rooms. Others have been put through excruciatingly long wait periods while they're suffering critical injuries, all this type of thing. So that's ridiculous that they would come in and not fund this thing, or they're going to downgrade it, right? So they don't want to go up to the $3 billion threshold that's purported it could blow out to. But hey, you're giving $3 billion to landlords. Why not give it to a hospital? You're giving $216 million to tobacco. Why not give it to a hospital? There's an endless amount of arguments for that, and I tell you, we just keep saying them every week and they just fall on deaf ears. So we have to work out how to apply pressure in different ways. But then at another end of that scale, our whānau who are all caught in poverty live below the poverty line, and homelessness, helplessness, joblessness, everythinglessness. They're not too worried about a hospital, a mega hospital. They want to get a damn person to come and help them when their kids are sick, or when they're sick, or when their queer is sick. Can't even get that right. And you've currently got the government defunding the one crowd who do get it right, whānau ora, the crowd with the reach, the crowd with the network, or the iwi providers who have the reach and the network, they are currently being actively defunded by the government. It is crazy.
Tēnā koe Tākuta Ferris, tērā me parimata mō te taitonga.
Kia ora.
Mai te tonga ki te raki, te uru ki te tai rāwhiti, puta noa i tēnei motu e kia nei, he whenua taurikura mō tātou. Mauri tū, mauri ora, ki tēnei tai au. Tēnei te whakauti atu nei ki a te Māngai Pāho me irirangi te motu, nā rāua tēnei hōtaka i taunaki. We'll be back in a fortnight, no horo mai.